Welcome to the first joint debate organized by the Review of Democracy, an online platform of the CEU Democracy Institute and Democracy Seminar, a platform based at the New School for Social Research in New York. Before I move on to present our guests, let me give the floor to the leaders of the RevDem and the Democracy Seminar, Laszlo Brust and Jeffrey Goldfarb. As this debate, as I said, is the enterprise of the two legendary schools. So, Laszlo, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laszlo Brust. I'm the co-director of the Central European University's Democracy Institute. We are very glad to co-host this evening the discussion of the Czech elections that are themselves very important, but they have also relevance for the whole regions. We are in Central Eastern Europe. We always watch each other's what's going on, partly because we would love to see in them opportunities for change and signs for general processes of change, but also for looking at opportunities of how the opponents of populist or authoritarian regimes can learn from each other. That has been the practice in the region since the old regime, and it stays with us. And hopefully we will have wonderful debate on this issue. I would like to thank all the participants for coming. I wish you very interesting discussions, and pass over the floor to our friends in New York. Jeff.
Thank you, Laszlo. And I also would like to thank all the participants in advance. I'm very excited about this event that we're collaborating with the folks at CEU and the Review of Democracy. The Democracy Seminar was originally founded in the mid-1980s, and as I recall, Laszlo participated a bit in it. And it was indeed an activity where people who were concerned about the possibilities or committed to the possibilities of constituting democratic life in Central Europe started speaking with each other and with colleagues in New York. We have revived the Democracy Seminar 3-4 years ago because the threat of authoritarianism is now worldwide. As I put it back then in the distant past, we had our dialogue across the old Iron Curtain, and now indeed we are all in the same boat. We're all facing this global threat of authoritarianism, and as in the 1980s, even more so now, the need for Democrats, committed people who are concerned with constituting democracy against the authoritarian threat, need to learn from each other. And I'm excited from each other's experiences, compare notes, and actually figure out ways to proceed together. I read about the Czech elections with great interest and enthusiasm, thinking that maybe we have something to learn from the Czech experience. And also an old colleague from the Democracy Seminar, Jan Urban, wrote a note to us suggesting, wait a second, things aren't so bright, and he gave some reasons for why we should be not as hopeful as I was prone to be. So I look forward to actually trying to figure out what happened, not to restore my hopefulness or fortify my pessimism, but to figure out what's going on in the Czech Republic and what it has to say about the situation of Democrats worldwide. So I look forward very much to being here and listening to what the participants have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff and Laszlo. Let me very briefly introduce our speakers today. Most of you who are following us on Facebook or Twitter probably read the bios, but let me do it very briefly, and after that we'll start right with the first question. So we have Petra Guasti with us, who is assistant professor of democratic theory at the Faculty of Social Sciences, Charles University in Prague, and a senior research fellow at the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Sciences. Her research focuses on the reconfiguration of the political landscape and revolves around three themes: representation, democratization, and populism. Petra Gümplová is team leader of the project Structural Change of Property at the University of Jena. She received her PhD from the New School of Social Research. Her research interests include modern international political theory and global justice with reference to natural resources and human rights. Daniel Hegedüs is visiting fellow for Central Europe at German Marshall Fund. I see. Yes. Okay. Daniel is with us. Perfect. He writes and speaks extensively on populism and democratic backsliding in Central and Eastern Europe, and also European and foreign affairs of the Visegrad countries. So this is also an important aspect of our discussion today. He's frequently quoted in various major European outlets. I will not list all of them, but we are very happy to have him with us. And last but absolutely not least, Jiří Přebaň is professor of law at Cardiff University. He is the founding director of the Center of Law and Society, as well as editor of the Journal of Law and Society. He regularly contributes to the Czech and international media, and we are very happy to have him with us. We are very happy and grateful to have all the panelists with us today. So let me jump straight to the first question. So I wanted to start from a general question, following up a little bit of what Jeffrey has said, whether there are reasons for optimism or maybe not really. I would like to ask all of you to share with us your general impressions when it comes to Czech elections and its result, meaning also the Czech government. And here I would like to start with Petra Guasti, if possible.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you again for the invitation. It's a pleasure and honor to see many of my personal intellectual heroes, at least like that. And I want to say hello from Prague, so from my niece's room. So that's not really my wallpaper, but anyway. So thank you for the first question. I thought to raise three brief points, and I was also trying to think not to cover the field for everybody. I think that the three major points aside of the results are turnout, mobilization, which is connected to turnout, and coalition building. So as for the turnout, I think that an important thing is to say that these elections had 4.6% higher turnout compared to the previous ones. I think, so I thought numbers should be put on the table. I personally would ascribe most of this increase in turnout to the activity of civil society, especially to the group Million Moments for Democracy, which for the first time ran an incredible, like a US style, if something like that can exist in the Czech Republic, but a contact campaign in a pandemic combined with an outstanding digital outreach, but throughout the country. And I think that it is important to see that the increase of votes was not only in major cities, but that it happened even in medium and smaller size cities. That's where the support for the democratic opposition came from. So that's on the turnout and mobilization. I would also like to mention a little bit some of the numbers. So where do I took some data, looked at some data of transfers of votes. So I think what's really interesting, starting with the losers. So ANO, which has lost the elections by several, like less than a point, actually lost about 160,000 votes to the conservative coalition Spolu It has lost 100,000 votes to the radical right SPD and about 60,000 to the Oath, to a law and order style party led by a former policeman. It has, however, been able to, ANO was simultaneously able to cover some of its loss by mobilizing non-voters. And today I found some interesting emerging data on a correlation between voting for ANO and a district where one of the Agrofert companies is actually based, which would explain some of it. Agrofert Holding is a very large company, and it's a major employer in many cities. Next, for the losers, of course, Social Democrats and Communists, which didn't cross the 5% thresholds. It's interesting, the cannibalization of Social Democrats finished by ANO. 80% of Social Democratic voters left to ANO, 40,000 to SPD, and 60,000 stayed at home. And I think this is really also important. Social Democrats were not able to bring their own voters to the polls. And as for the communists, it's also interesting, and again the same story. ANO has cannibalized the Czech left. 100,000 of communist voters, previous communist voters, left to ANO, and 60,000 to the law and order. So about 80,000 altogether to the radical right. I think what's interesting among the winners, I think the biggest story about the winners is the ability of attracting non-voters in large majorities and the transfer of votes in the final weeks between the two coalitions. So they were able both to attract significant portion of non-voters, but in the final weeks, the competition was not between the two opposition coalitions, but not between them and ANO, but between each other. To summarize, I think shallow linkages between voters and parties. This is why you can have this kind of roller coaster of voter switching. Civil society mobilization matters, and it was able to mobilize not only voters and make them switch votes, but also to mobilize a high proportion of non-voters. ANO project fear has hurt the pirates, but vision matters. So I think that's from me on this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now let me give the floor to Petra Gümplová.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I greet everybody from Frankfurt, Germany. Yeah, I have also like 3 short comments to say as a way of sort of immediate reaction to the elections. I think, first of all, the good news is that Babis is gone. I think it's a good news that he's gone from the government. I think it's definitely a good news that he's gone from the international stage, especially European Union, obviously because of his conflict of interest. Yeah, I think he is gone because this very specific personalized brand of populism that he represented lost. I mean, it lost very narrowly, but it lost nonetheless. And I think it lost because it was exposed as very short-lived, very unsustainable in the long run, and just completely unable to meet the challenges and demands of modern governance in this crisis-prone politics of today. Yeah. So on one hand, I think Babis completely failed to deliver this promise of, providing this business-like efficient governance. Of course, this we have to thank the pandemic. We have to thank the pandemic, however absurd that sounds. Yeah, that it really exposed Babis's incompetence as a crisis manager. He was exposed again and again as a corrupt oligarch with, who engages in predatory business practices, who cannot resolve his ongoing conflict of interest. And also, I would like to mention, this specific charismatic leadership, which in fact was just, this extremely politically incorrect, arrogant, uncivic, eccentric, incompetent, despotic, you know, this kind of bragging, screaming, tantrum throwing. This, I think, just proved too excessive. Yeah, so that's really good news. This kind of eccentric, charismatic leadership is gone. I think in this regard, Babis, this is the same reason why Trump, I think, ultimately lost. Then what is, I think, less good news is that there are still plentiful reasons to worry about populism and democratic backsliding. And if not democratic backsliding, then certainly, you know, some sort of undermining of pluralistic democratic governance. I mean, for one thing, ANO like lost some voters. We just heard that from Petra, but not too many overall. Populism and right-wing nationalism in some form or the other are supported by the majority of the population, and from the cast votes, the parties which are right-wing or populist got I mean, if my counting is correct, like close to 50% of the votes. Yeah. Now we already heard also that the left and central left has no representation in the parliament. There is a very large constituency of voters who will not be represented in the parliament because almost 1 million of votes were cast for the parties which didn't make it over the threshold. Then I would also like to mention that you know, young people and young generations are close to completely unrepresented in the parliament, and that Green Party also, you know, was suffered such a massive loss as well. Yeah, so this I think gives us a little bit like less optimistic outlook on the election. I mean, as for the question, I mean, the question that everybody's raising, right? I mean, we will get to that in greater detail, but just to offer just a preliminary thesis on this, yeah, and on this conclusion or the question whether are we firmly back on track to liberal democracy. I think this is a very sort of simplistic conclusion. I think that we have to discuss what liberal democracy means or should mean today in these very changing circumstances. And I mean very changing circumstances of justice and what equality demands and what you know, pluralistic governance demands in these divided societies. And only then I think we can assess whether this is some sort of, you know, optimistic, you know, that we can draw this optimistic conclusion that we're back on track to, or we're back in liberal democratic track. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I hope that we will have time to discuss what liberal democracy is and whether we are indeed, whether Czech is indeed right on track. And let me now turn to Jiří Přibaň for his thoughts about Czech elections and the new government.
Okay, thank you very much. After these brilliant analyses and evaluations by two Petras, hard rock women of Czech political science, it's very difficult for me to add anything which wouldn't be a repetition of great insights. On optimism, there is a Czech saying that optimism is the lack of information. So I may add that the result of this election is a happy coincidence. Yeah, this is a happy coincidence, and exactly today, one of the coalitions, of the winning coalitions, which actually lost, the Pirate Party and Mayors coalition, launched a constitutional complaint about the election results, especially as regards the first scrutinium of the imperial method and its application in one of the regions. It's a technicality, but it shows how complicated the system of proportionate vote is, and that the current law actually had to be revised, rewritten in light of the judgment of the Constitutional Court. So when we look at institutional framework, there are reasons to be cheerful. First, independent judiciary works, constitutional review works, and the electoral process and political process are compliant with it. Because initially there was almost an outrage about how could the court decide it, but in the end, half a year later, Czech voters went to election and voted according to the new law. Now about the results. So in that sense, Czech constitutional democratic process works. About the results, we all feared that Babis populist party will win and forge either minority government with the tacit support of extremist parties, communists and extreme right-wing SPD, the Direct Democracy Party, or it will form a coalition with them. This was a real risk, or the continuation of the same and a small erosion of some principles of the constitutional rule of law. This didn't happen. We expected this, and we ended up with just the mainstream conservative centrist government, which after the appointments by the designated Prime Minister Fiala turned out actually more centrist than the right-wing voters expected. So Fiala himself, leader of ODS, Civic Democratic Party, actually steers his coalition to the centrist, socially conservative position, and in that sense, this is just a normal, standard process in democracy. What is a real problem, I think, however, is the absence of the left. In the discussion right after the election, my immediate response was, Czechia is looking for the left. Social Democrats out, communists out, nobody will miss them among Democrats, but the left politics, and this is the main paradox of the Czech elections, the left politics and the left voters will be represented by the billionaire oligarch and his movement, ANO. Yeah, so for the future political development, what is at stake is reform of the Czech left-wing political parties and their return to the parliament. I mean, especially Social Democrats. My final remark in this initial presentation. What does it mean in a wider context? Czech elections, few thousand votes and the result would be different. Czech elections only prove the general tendency of democratic societies everywhere, that societies are deeply divided. Voters tend to vote for populist parties out of alienation, dissatisfaction, and what both Petra Guasti and Petra Gümplová already mentioned, because of the lack of social justice issues in previous governments. It will be highly scrutinized whether this centrist right-wing government will offer some readjustment in terms of rebuilding, I don't want to say welfare state, but a state focusing on issues of social justice and equality, which had been neglected by previous right-wing governments and which led to the rise of populist movement, apart from corruption of the previous government. So I completely agree with Petra Guasti's comment on the importance of civic activism. Without the public mobilization provided for by the Million Moments for Democracy, there would be no victory for these two coalitions. I completely agree with Petra Gümplová's assessment of the failure or absence of the social justice issues and a complete disaster of green politics. This is a non-starter in Czech, but reason to be cheerful. The regime change is being postponed. The worry is what's going to happen with Babis Reloaded. From Poland and Hungary, we know that Kaczynski had to lose to be reinvented in 2015 as a major force. And the same happened with Orban. Orban had to be a loser to re-emerge as Orban Reloaded, hardcore illiberal nationalist. My question is, what's gonna happen with Babis too? Because these elections, and here I'm gonna stop, these elections were just the first round of elections in which the question of regime stability is going to be tested. Next election is coming 2023, January presidential election, and Babis will stand.
Thank you so much. And that's the right moment, I guess, to ask about the nature of the government that left in Czechia. So the nature of Babis government, and here I wanted to ask about the failure of whether the fact that Babis lost the election or didn't manage to form the government means that that liberalism is losing ground in Czechia. Whether this is a kind of a sign of hope for Central Europe. Let me start this question from our non-Czech speaker, Daniel Hegedüs.
Thank you so much, Michal. Thank you for having me, and many greetings from Berlin. And please also allow me to start with a caveat. I am sitting in the office, so not in the home office. So this very beautiful bookshelf behind me is not of my own at home. And indeed, so my expertise in Czech domestic politics cannot be compared to my fellow speakers one. So therefore, I would like to approach the issue from a regional perspective, and potentially just summarize my thoughts in 4 points. What can be the potential implications of the Czech election results, and also of the forming of the new Czech elections for the Central and Eastern European region, and potentially also a bit beyond it. And I also would start with the obvious, which is that this is a democratic success story. That a populist strongman could be ousted from power via competitive democratic elections. And if we take into consideration that the trends of Central and Eastern European politics moved during the past decade into more and more authoritarian direction, then I think it's really an occasion what we have to celebrate, that at least during the past 2 years, in 2020, 2021, the pendulum of the regime quality is swinging back into a democratic direction. It started with the Slovakian elections early 2022, and the move continued also this year via the repeated Bulgarian elections, and also through the Czech elections in this October. And because it's a success story, I'm convinced that this example will be closely studied by democratic forces throughout Central and Eastern Europe. And I think it offers 4 very important lessons learned. I also penned a shorter policy brief on these lessons at GMF at the end of October, which doesn't only focus on the Czech elections, but I think it offers perfect examples of these lessons learned. The first one underlines the importance of unification of opposition forces. but it also underlines that this is not an absolute demand or requirement, but this is a kind of optimalization process. That by constituting the contender political groups at the side of the democratic opposition, both the specificities of the electoral system has to be taken into consideration, but also the attitude structures and the demand structure of the electorate. And of course, for example, in Hungary, the opposition bloc was coerced by the Hungarian electoral system into a single unified bloc. But the Czech example is also showing that this is not the only pattern which can be successful. And I think especially from a Polish perspective, the Czech example is very important because it shows that dividing the democratic opposition into a more conservative and a more progressive bloc works, and it can lead to a maximalization of the votes gathered by the opposition forces. My second thought on the lessons learned would be that everything starts at the local level. And I would emphasize the importance of the 2020 regional elections in Czechia from the perspective how it reinforced, for example, the pirates and mayors group and practically also give a huge impetus into the forging of this one single progressive bloc at the Czech opposition side. The third lessons learned is that forging democratic elections as a plebiscite about the populist strongman is a sine qua non of such electoral challenges. And of course, it also constitutes some elements of populism. Of course, it leads to social polarization, but I think this price of polarization is the price which has to be paid for this democratic success, and the democratic political parties can return to power. And I just would like to underline the point made by Petra Guasti that practically the cannibalization or the consuming of the left parties, ČSSD and the Czech communists by ANO, was a consequence of this sort of polarization. Of course, this polarization mobilized potential ANO supporters, but at the end of the day, it resulted in the fact that the party of Babis remained without allies on the political stage, and it led to his electoral defeat. And the fourth lessons learned would be, which was also mentioned by Petra Guasti, is that civil society organization can play a crucial role in the mobilization for democratic political players, and it is a playbook or a blueprint which has to be used, if possible, by other democratic forces in Central Europe or throughout Central and Eastern Europe as well. And we can see similar examples both in Hungary and Bulgaria. My second point would be that I think we will see a kind of return of democracy and human rights centered foreign policy to Czechia. And in some respect, it will also shape the Central and Eastern European democratic landscape. The country will be stronger in its effort in countering authoritarian interference, not only domestically, but also at the international stage. It will be tougher on China. And I think that will mean that the country will be a perfect protagonist and important player in the new US democracy agenda. Other Central and Eastern European countries already have played a rather pioneering role, let to be mentioned Lithuania or Slovakia. But with an eye on the fact that this process will continue, I think based on the tradition of the Havelian foreign policy, the Czech Republic is the best situated in Central and Eastern Europe to be practically the flag bearer of democracy and human rights in its foreign policy. And it will also have the consequence that I think we will see growing distance between Czechia and all those regional alliance systems which are recently dominated by authoritarian players, let it be the Visegrad cooperation format or also the Three Seas initiative, which will weaken internationally the Polish and the Hungarian governments. And I wouldn't like to consume too much time, so very briefly on my two last points. which both have domestic and international components. I think what we will see here is also a kind of the rehabilitation of conservatism. Spolu, which is okay, a centrist, but also a per se conservative political group, played a central role in ousting a populist strongman. Spolu is part of the same political family, ECR, European conservatives and reformists like PiS. And I think there is a widespread narrative in Central and Eastern Europe, which states that conservatism in the region goes hand in hand with authoritarian and illiberal tendencies. And I think this narrative is very dangerous because it's a trap. It's not only superficial, but it also reinforces another narrative, which is spread by the real illiberal players, Law and Justice, Fidesz, stating that all of the criticism around their rule of law performance and democracy performance is practically just an ideological clash. I think meeting fundamental requirements of democratic elections and rule of law is not an ideological question. And in this case, the Czech conservative centrist political powers demonstrated that conservatism in Central and Eastern Europe is compatible to democracy, to rule of law, to the European integration, and it undermines the claim of Kaczynski, Orban, and their like-minded followers that they represent true conservatism in Central and Eastern Europe. And very briefly, my last point, that it's also a liberation for the European liberals. ANO and Prime Minister Babis was a huge burden for the Renew Europe group, especially when they criticized democratic backsliding in countries like Poland and Hungary. All European large political families have had or have their black sheeps, for example, Smer in Slovakia or the Romanian Social Democrats for SND, Fidesz in the past for EPP. But fortunately, the liberals can now join the Greens, then they don't have a black sheep, meaning that their claims that they represent a true approach to democracy and rule of law in Europe and can criticize other political players will be freed from that burden put on them by Prime Minister Babis. And I'm stopping here and I'm very much looking forward to a conversation.
Thank you very much. Daniel, as a person working at the European Parliament, I fully share your views, especially on the freeing of the Renew Europe. May I just ask you now to share with us your thoughts about the nature of the Babis government so that we can start second round? And then I would go, and also because you already touched upon many issues related to the Babis government and the European issues that you wanted to talk about. So I wanted to ask if you want to comment further on that.
Yes, then potentially just in 5 phrases. I think he was an illiberal in the making and an illiberal in shackles. And I think he was not an illiberal by conviction. For example, if we take a look on his political stances in 2013, but because more or less that strategy allowed him to remain in power in face of all of the corruption allegations and conflict of interest issues, which was in his backpack from the very beginning, but which made him target of growing criticism both at the domestic stage and at the European level. But if we take a look on his track records, especially during his second government term, then we see that there were increasing attacks on the independence of the media, especially the independence of the public broadcasters in Czechia, frequent intimidation of journalists, and of course a kind of populistic discourse and narrative which undermined the importance and relativized the importance of checks and balances in a political system. Which means that in a discursive sense, of course, in 2021, he was a kind of illiberal populist. But from a democracy perspective or regime quality perspective, I would like to underline that Czechia is one of the few remaining consolidated democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, where from an institutional perspective, no democratic backsliding has really taken place during his 8-year tenure. And the reason is very simple. He was an illiberal in shackles. First, he had a coalition government with a political partner which doesn't necessarily share his illiberal agenda. And during his second term, he simply led a minority government, meaning that his opportunities to undermine the independence of the judiciary system or other institutional checks and balances, or just simply to build a kind of deep state, which was built by the Smer under the tenure of Robert Fico in Slovakia, wasn't within the limits of his political realities, because he simply lacked the power to do that. Which is, I think, was a very, very fortunate circumstance and development for the Czech democracy, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Let me now move to Jiří Příběh, who already started to discuss the Babis government. But if I could ask you about your thoughts about the nature of this government, about your conclusions from his years in power.
Okay, I think the question has several levels, institutional, ideological. If we start with ideology, the difference between Poland, Hungary on one hand and Czechia on the other is that in Czechia, everything is as if. Yeah, so we don't have real fascists. We have an entrepreneur with fascism that is Tomio Okamura. Yeah, he's not interested in creating a fascist regime. He's just an entrepreneur. He wants to capitalize on this rhetoric. Andrij Babis started as a true liberal urban movement, anti-corruption, exactly as Daniel said, and he transformed gradually into an illiberal in shackles, which is something I liked. This is a nice metaphor, because he discovered there is a potential to get more votes. So he moved to the left, he moved to the illiberal, populist, anti-immigration politics. But again, this was as if. In fact, what we experienced was a Berlusconi style of anti-politics, entrepreneurial, partisan, yet based on business interests rather than ideology. And in this sense, Babis was a post-ideological leader. When we look at institutional levels, it was difficult for Babis to emerge as a strong authoritarian leader pushing for democratic backsliding because exactly of constitutional checks and balances. Remember, we are a bicameral country with very strong constitutional court, still very powerful, independent, and most importantly, proportionate system for the lower chamber. Never allowed any party to rule with the absolute majority. All governments were either minority one-party government, which was in fact a tacit grand coalition of civic democrats and social democrats in between 1998 and 2002. But all other governments had been coalition governments. So Babis couldn't fully enforce his program and was limited even within the executive branch. And yes, there had been, especially towards the end of his rule, there had been attacks on the media. You're right that he linked up with extremists to fill the supervisory boards with people who really attacked the public media. Justice was so controversial that it actually steered the public mobilization and the Million Moments for Democracy actually seized the opportunity to mobilize the civic democratic public against this democratic backsliding in making. So it was stopped early on. It's my assessment of the last 4 years Yes, Babis, like any strong populist leaders, Petra Gümplová described him very well in the initial comments. He would love to be a strong, authoritarian, unshackled leader. He couldn't because of institutional limitations. And I don't want to sound... he was very predatory on getting voters of extremist parties like SPD and communist voters, but it shows that there is a certain limit to which you can get and beyond which no party can mobilize. So I think his maximum is 30% and he cannot get more. And therefore, in the executive branch of the government, there is very little chance that he could reemerge as a true nationalist, ideological, authoritarian leader like Orban, because I think actually Orban's visit before election really harmed Babis because he didn't realize that his voters are really xenophobic. They don't want anybody from outside to speak on behalf of Czech voters. So they don't want to be lectured even by Orban. Okay, enough there. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and let me now turn to Petra Gümplová to ask for her assessment of Babis.
Yeah. Well, I think like many things have been said. Yeah, I think I would really like to emphasize that I think that we should see Babis as Babis's political style and governance style as a sort of managerial populism. Yeah, and it's a kind of it's a specific kind of populism. I mean, I prefer not to call it technocratic populism because it does not really rely on technocratic scientific expertise. In fact, it delegitimizes, scientific technocratic governance, and managerialism, like managerial ethos is something that really highlights like the difference between managerialism and democratic governance. Yeah, like managerialism emphasizes business-like efficiency, success, performance-driven approach, getting things done quickly in common sense way. And this is what Babis promised, and this is what he meant to apply on political governance. And of course, the consequences or the dangers involved in this is that it delegitimizes or undermines liberal democratic pluralism. It is anti-elitist, anti-experts, it's anti-representation, and it ultimately like depoliticizes the people and the necessary and the hard work of consensus building across the different groups in a society. So this is exactly the kind of negative democratic consequence of this kind of this populist style. I mean, I wouldn't really call it illiberal. I think Babis's government was not an illiberal government. There were not really like tendencies to undermine, constitutionalism and checks and balances. I mean, we heard that before. The judicial branch remained strong. The electoral integrity remained strong and intact. The civic sector, as Petra highlighted, like remained untouched and strong after all, and was key for ousting him from power. Also, despite the fact that Babis concentrated media, economic and political power, I mean, the press freedom remained also relatively strong in the Czech Republic. No attempts to change the constitution. So like then I think it comes down to what we mean by illiberal and like how much democracy, like what is the difference between democracy and liberalism and where they exactly meet. So I think that some of the danger, some of the elements of democratic backsliding were present. Yeah, they came from the Czech president. They came, like I said, from the concentration of power, and from this hysterical managerial way of doing things. But by and large, Czech Republic has remained, constitutional democracy. Yeah, like Daniel emphasized, it has been labeled by Freedom House as a consolidated democracy, unlike Poland or Hungary, which are, Hungary is labeled as a hybrid regime. Poland is a semi-consolidated democracy. Yeah, so this is really the main difference. And so I think that the illiberal turn has not really been there, and so it's also incorrect to say that that it stopped, so to speak.
Thank you very much. And the last word on the question whether Babis was an illiberal or not, we'll ask this question to Petra Guasti, if possible.
Yes, thank you. In order to not repeat, I would like to limit myself to 3 points. Point number 1 is that both technocracy and populism of Andrij Babis are forms of appeals. They are not ideology. They are promises, but not ideological convictions. And I think that what we have seen in praxis, Andrij Babis promised to run the state as a firm with experts. The pandemic was a stress test of this technocratic appeal, as Petra noted. And I think what we have seen is that what the technocracy is for, it's to hide behind. Technocracy is to avoid, is used, this notion of expertise is used as a shield to avoid accountability for actions. I would just like to throw in the round, the Czech Republic is on its 5th minister, now in the Minister of Health in less than 1 year. This brings me to the second point, and that is, and what we have seen throughout the pandemic, that we think that these populist leaders are in the driving seat, but they are not. They are, and I think there is this moment which is completely similar between Andrij Babis and Donald J. Trump. And that is when Donald J. Trump, after presidency at Mar-a-Lago, was asked, why didn't you put on the mask? You would have saved so many lives. And he answered, it was not popular with my voters. In the driving seat of Donald J. Trump's presidency was the radicalized base of a GOP, in the driving seat of Andrij Babis' premiership in the pandemic, were the voters those who didn't want to wear masks. Andrij Babis actually, and I think this is interesting about this style of politics, which started with Tony Blair, and continued also with Berlusconi, as Petra noted. And there is an outstanding book which I recommend to everybody by Chris Bickerton and Carlo Inversini-Azzetti on technopopulism. And I think they explore all these links and based it really with this transformation of the Labour Party by Tony Blair. And so to finish the thought on Babis and masks, once whatever measure in a pandemic became unpopular, he wouldn't let it continue. And so in the fall of 2020, people died unnecessarily because Minister of Health, then and now the same, but in between there were 3 others, actually said that masking will be compulsory. But Andrij Babis, from his polls, which he was running out of actually his own company, not out of the office of the government, knew that this is absolutely unpopular, that people are getting tired with Soviets, these measures were not introduced. And there was the horrible winter when people died unnecessarily. So I think that I want to reiterate, we think the populists are in the driving seat, but they are not. They are desperate for popularity, and the driving seat is empty, and we must understand the politics like that. And I want to finish with my third point. And the third point is that I agree with all the previous speakers. Andrij Babis personally, and I'm not a psychologist or a clinical psychologist, so I don't want to do the criminology version of Czech politics. So I don't want to say that. I think that the illiberal tendencies are there clearly in ANO. I can illustrate it with the absolute absence of intra-party democratic procedures within ANO. It's basically if something is run as a firm, and that is a very, let's say, like how Agrofert is managed, so is ANO managed. So it's a very top heavy, basically no middle management, a lot of turnover of managers at ANO. That's very similar how it's run. So what I want to say, that the real threat of Andrij Babis was his willingness, his need to stay in power at any cost, and the willingness to coalesce with anybody to remain in power. And I think the real danger, and I think Jiří Přibaň mentioned it at the beginning, the real danger is what didn't happen, and we can call it a chance or serendipity. I think it keeps on playing such an important role in Czech politics, is the price Andrij Babis was willing to pay, but he wouldn't pay the price because we all would pay the price. The coalition with SPD, the price for that is clear. It would be a referendum on exit from the European Union. The price with the communists would be even more, let's say, clientelism in state-owned companies, the media freedom of the state TV, etc., etc. So I think that is important to understand that the technocracy and populism are both forms of appeal. They are not ideologies. These are ideologically empty vessels, willing to fill themselves with whatever content the voters favor at the moment. So I think that is connecting the point 1 and 2. And 3, they are willing to do anything to stay in power, and others are to pay the price. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me now move to the next point. Next point is related to the new Czech government, and here I wanted to ask if the hopes that were presented by Daniel Hegedüs, the conservatives that will at least partially be in power, will accept the rules of the liberal democracy, and it will strengthen, or at least will accept the rules of the constitutional democracy, whether this is the right description. And if I may ask you about your possible predictions, what will be the most important actions of the new Czech government? And here I will start maybe with Petra Gümplová, if possible.
Yeah, okay. I mean, when it comes to this new government that is being formed, I mean, like I'm not very overly optimistic when it comes to hailing this as really like democracy being back. Yeah, I think it will be economically very liberal. Yeah, it will end up engaging in austerity politics. Yeah, I mean, it declared the priority to reduce debt, not to raise taxes, cut welfare benefits, and so on. Yeah, it will be very conservative to the point of really being completely anti-progressive. I mean, it does not offer anything, in terms of gender, greater gender equality. It does not offer anything, to the LGBT community. There's absolutely nothing to offer for the young generation and their climate anxieties, which are very real. Their, lack of economic prospects and financial and economic security. It is completely ignorant of the necessity to really recognize the growing social and cultural diversification of the society, and the necessity to really recognize that, let it be by adopting gay marriage rights, for example, and so on. Yeah, I mean, the fact that there is no clear climate policy, I consider that very, very disturbing. There is I mean, at least, in the campaign, there was absolutely no commitment to name the date of end of coal or carbon neutrality. I mean, there's this date, 2038, like despite the fact that Germany, for example, now committed to end coal in 2030. Then also when it comes to I think when it comes to foreign policy, which I think it's the very important question regarding the possible resonance of this election in the region. So as it has been said, the new government, I mean, declares itself to be very pro-Western, but it does mean more transatlantic rather than European. I mean, there's absolutely no enthusiastic embrace of Berlin or Brussels. Yeah, so there's this very clear commitment to NATO. Yeah, but there's also I mean, I checked the coalition agreement, and there's also the sentence about support and commitment to the cooperation in the Visegrad group as an important regional platform. I think we can expect that some coalition partners will seek to weaken that link, but in ODS, the strongest party, there are these people and wings that are very committed to this kind of regional cooperation. So I think it remains to be seen, like how what kind of regional cooperation this new government will end up actually performing and supporting. Yeah. Of course, I mean, we can expect that like the enthusiastic embrace of Orban will end. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, like there are people in ODS who are much less critical of Polish and Hungarian governments. Yeah, yes, I mean, we can expect like more emphasis on human rights. That's what Daniel mentioned, and yeah, which is kind of revival of the Václav Havel legacy. What it will actually mean in the practice also remains to be open. I think I would like to, I would like us not to forget that all the parties in the Czech Republic, even all the parties in this new government, remain very, very, anti-immigrants. So the question, for example, of human rights of refugees is like an absolute taboo in the Czech politics. So what this human rights foreign policy will actually mean, I'm very curious. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you very much. It was very, 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 very broad. And so let me now turn to Petra Guasti, if possible. And now, as we are not that close to the end, but still we don't have that much time, I would ask you to limit your answers to like 2 minutes, if that was possible. I would be very grateful for that, so that we don't go beyond our time too much. So Petra Guasti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I can limit myself to truly one sentence, and that sentence is: we can keep democracy, but the price is progressive policies. And I would end there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's food for thought that I hope that we will still be able to discuss. It was also already discussed a little bit, but I hope we will come back to that point. So let me now move to Jiří Přibaň about his thoughts about the new government.
Yes, I would sign that sentence by Petra Guasti and quote you, of course, yeah, in good academic spirit of collegiality. But I think this is what Petra Gümplová summarized was exactly what caused. Everybody expected that the true contender will be pirates and mayors. And this is exactly what Babis focused on: immigration, identity politics, and climate. Yeah. So the pirates will force you to accept immigrants in your house, and you will have to share cars because of carbon footprint. Yeah. This was his election campaign, and it worked. Yeah. So you just have to take it from there. But I think the government will face much bigger challenge than gay marriage with ministers in Christian Democratic Union in charge, which will be economic crisis and post-COVID crisis. And because Czech economy is so profoundly linked and dependent on the working of German economy, so Czech economic policies will be carefully and closely following European, German economic policies. So you can expect certain convergence here. When you look at foreign policy, I think Petra Gümplová is absolutely right, yeah, that there is almost a revival of the Havel legacy. Foreign ministry is going to be in the hands of the Pirate Party, and it is really noticeable that those hardliners, anti-EU hardliners in Civic Democratic Party had been completely sidelined. Yeah? People like Zahradil, people like Vondra, they have no voice in the formation of the government. And it's no coincidence that Zahradil, who is the biggest Eurosceptic in Civic Democratic Party, launched an appeal to the role of Visegrad in the European Union. So he wants Visegrad because he knows that Visegrad is toxic, Visegrad is populist nowadays, so he wants to play the Visegrad card against the EU card. But Czech Republic and the government won't be playing this card. This is absolutely for sure, even though we don't know who's gonna be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but it may be again the Constitutional Court who will have to decide whether the appointment is President's prerogative or whether President just signs the appointments by Prime Minister. An interesting question here. So the next government, yes, will be centrist conservative government, which definitely will not be echoing some of progressive politics themes outlined by Petra, but for a reason of caution, because they will be attacked by the populists in parliament. So there is some equilibrium, and I believe that sooner or later the pirates will have to leave this coalition and will have to start working as the left-wing progressive opposition of this government. But when it's going to be done, it's a big if and when for the pirates.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to turn to Daniel. He already touched upon both the question on the new government and the next question that I wanted to ask to ask all of you about the implications for Central Europe. But I wanted to ask Daniel if you have any other thoughts that you would like to share on both topics of new government and the implications for Central Europe. We listened to you very carefully, and we know that you mentioned that very interesting insights on that already. But if you have anything more to add on that, we are very happy to listen to your thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you, Michał. I think I already covered the question of implication for Central and Eastern Europe in my first intervention. If you allow me just 4 phrases on what to expect from the government, solely focusing on EU affairs and foreign policy. I think it's fair to say that we won't see any significant ambitions from this government at the level of the EU policy for 2 very simple reasons. The first one, that Czechia will hold the rotating council presidency in the second half of 2022, and it will consume all of the available resources, both in mental term and in organizational and administrative term, to focus on this honest broker role. And if we take a look on the preparedness of that process, then we see that it's rather in the early stage. We do not know what will be the priorities of the upcoming Czech presidency, and I completely agree that although the rather Eurosceptic forces are sidelined within ODS, it shouldn't be forget that the Czech society itself is one of the most Eurosceptic societies within the European Union, so it won't be a priority for the government. I think they also don't have the necessary policy ammunition, what they could upload at European level. So I think the Czech EU presidency will be determined by the European political agenda and not by the priorities of the Czech government. And I just would like to emphasize that all of the coordination of the EU policies is within the Prime Minister's office, so not in the Foreign Ministry, and therefore the ODS priorities will determine the approach and not the priorities of the pirates. And second, I only would like to emphasize what huge importance the personal question has, that who will lead the Foreign Ministry, whether it will be Jan Lipavsky or someone else, because he personally was responsible for the legislative motion to start the process on the Czech Magnitsky Act. So if there is a Czech politician who incorporates today in his person this very human rights and democracy-centered foreign policy approach, then it's Lipavsky. So I would expect that, for example, this very important initiative to have a national Magnitsky Act within Central Europe, whether the Czech legislation will proceed with that or not, will depend from this personal question. And the second one, what I expect, and I think we will see whether it will materialize or not just within a couple of days, because I think we will be able to see it among the Czech national commitments to the Summit for Democracy, whether the transition promotion program of the Czech government will be reinforced in a budgetary sense, whether Czech development aid and democracy promotion will be strengthened. And I think it will be crucial because other Central and Eastern European players, especially from the country I know the best, started to actively export authoritarian and illiberal tendencies towards regions like the Western Balkan, or first and foremost the Western Balkan, where Czech democracy promotion is also highly interested. So I think it would be highly beneficial if this democracy-centered foreign policy could be really strengthened in the first years or months of this new government, and Czechia could serve as a kind of counterbalance against illiberal tendencies in the Western Balkan or in the Eastern Partnership region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a poll, I would also underline the meaning of your words about the opposition, the strategy of the opposition in Czechia, and the two lists, because that's the discussion right now with the Polish opposition. And I know that they are in touch also with the Czech the parties that won the elections in Czechia, forming the government, and indeed the two lists are being an inspiration for Polish opposition. But let me now merge the two questions that I wanted to ask the other speakers. So the role of the results of the Czech results and the new government and its meaning for Central Europe, and the next question, the question on the legacy of Václav Havel. We wanted to discuss it because not only because actually it was already mentioned in the discussion, but also we have now the an important anniversary coming up, the 10 years of death of Václav Havel, and we wanted to discuss also very briefly if his legacy is still valid in Czechia, and if it's somehow whether it can serve as a lesson for Central Europe, as it served in the 80s, the decade that was mentioned by Jeffrey and Laszlo in their introductory remarks. So let me turn to Petra Guasti, and if I could ask her about the legacy of Václav Havel and perhaps the lessons both of this legacy for Central Europe and the legacy or the possible implications of the elections for Central Europe.
Thank you. So I will try to be brief. I think the first legacy is a positive one and complies with Havel, and that's the importance of civil society. I think that is something that has saved Czech democracy many times, and this time was not a difference. And I would recall how I started my first intervention. So the importance of civil society is definitely the legacy. And I think the second point is a more complex relationship with Havel's legacy, and that's the anti-political politics. And I think that when democracy is under attack, when liberal democracy is under attack, we cannot afford anti-political politics. We must remind ourselves that political decisions are at the ballot box, that you don't win by having the best policies, you win by winning elections, and that enables you to actually implement any policies. And I think finally, it's the importance of political parties. And I think that was this troubled relationship Havel always had with political parties. He was distrustful about them. And I'm really happy to see that the Million Moments for Democracy have understood this. And actually their newest initiative after election is asking their supporters to, well, you could say infiltrate, but to join political parties and to join them in groups. And I think that they have really pragmatic view of politics. So actually something that is a weakness of the Czech parties, which is that they have almost no members, can turn into a strength, because you can change these parties from within. In a representative democracy, that is where we live. Our liberal democracy is a representative democracy. It cannot function without political parties. When our parties run amok, when mainstream parties radicalize, when they throw out forbearance, we cannot keep liberal democracy. We, as people, we may be closer by our hearts and to civil society, but the future of liberal democracy is decided at the ballot box. I would stop there.
Thank you so much, and let me now turn to Petra Gümplová. So if I may address these two questions. So the meaning of the results for Central Europe and the legacy of Václav Havel for both Czechia and Central Europe.
Yeah, so about Havel's legacy, yeah, I think we have to distinguish political legacy and intellectual legacy. Yeah, when it comes to Havel's political legacy, then I fully agree with Petra that there are aspects that are very important, and they are exactly these two: the emphasis on civil society and its absolute, key role in democracy, and the emphasis on human rights and this human rights-based foreign policy. I think these are very important legacies. There are other legacies that are I think less inspirational, and exactly like Petra mentioned, his distrust in parliamentary democracy, party system, and also I think the huge distrust in technocratic management is something that I think remains slightly controversial. Yeah, but there's also this intellectual legacy, and I have myself written quite a bit on this, and I think Havel's ideas about these ideas about moral responsibility and moral obligation to engage in individual, action in the face of some oppressive, unjust circumstances. Yeah, I think this is really becoming more relevant than ever. Yeah, so these philosophical ideas, if you wish, yeah, about morality and political agency and how political agency has to start with sort of regaining, the moral integrity of the self. I mean, I'm a huge fan of these ideas. I think they can inspire us again to sort of rethink the importance of moral integrity of political leaders on one hand, and also they, I think, are today becoming important, these ideas about moral responsibility as a basis of democratic civic life. Yeah, I think this is because, we are getting into very specific contexts. I think our societies in the world is changing so massively. Yeah, there are these pressures of privatization, and law is becoming such an important, instrument regulating our lives, this ongoing economization of everything, the prevalence of instrumental reason ideologies and so on. So I think these conditions, I think, bring back this question about, sort of personal moral responsibility and how democratic agency actually starts from that very point. Yeah, so I think this should, of course, it has to be, purified of all those kinds of anti-modernist overtones and these these kinds of like these ideas that Havel also had, like the substantive ideas about community and so on. Of course, yeah, but that I think can be separated from that. So intellectual legacy, please, also, yeah, I don't know. Did you, Michal? Did you ask? Did you want me also to sort of have a closing word on this? Assessment about because I didn't get your.
Let's have the closing word on everything. So whatever you want to say as a closing word.
Okay. So yeah. So I'll leave that at that with Havel. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So now let me turn to Jiří Přibaň, ask him about both the legacy of Václav Havel and of course and the legacy and the meaning of the lectures for.
Okay, as my introductory essay for the translation of Havel's essays into Romanian was sent to me earlier today, I feel it's a special moment, yeah, that Havel's essays translated into Romanian for the first time. Originally, they thought it would be just a small paperback. It ended up as 600 plus hardback big book. Yeah? The problem in Czechia is that everybody speaks about Havel, but nobody reads him. And he is slowly turning into a symbol which can be appropriated. And I think there is a particular risk of him being appropriated by conservative politicians who otherwise are completely fascinated by Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, and they talk at the same time. They talk about truth and love slogan of Václav Havel. I mean, especially Saša Vondra and other post-dissident conservative politicians. Particular danger there. However, I believe that Václav Havel has a lot to say about civil society mobilization, defense of democracy as a value, not just as a working system, and as the leader of civic activism, not just for against democratic backsliding, against the support of the system, but a criticism of the system which doesn't deliver on environmental justice, which doesn't deliver on social justice, and simply which is focused on function rather than values. That said, I think the problematic legacy of Havel is that he is a politician of Czech society, Czech tradition, in which anti-political politics has a 200 years old tradition. It dates back to Palacký and 19th century, when Czechs simply retreated from party politics, parliamentary politics, and thought that they can achieve things only through small everyday job. I think sometimes big deeds are important, and Havel should be reinterpreted along these lines. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a fascinating debate. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and I hope that we will be able to come back to this big questions, not only small questions but also big questions related to the results of the election, but to the meaning of liberal democracy, and also what Václav Havel wrote about it. I fully agree with Zhigzhibin that we don't read Václav Havel enough. I guess that if you want to discuss liberal democracy in detail, this legacy and his writings are very interesting indeed, and his critical views of liberal democracy could also be helpful, or probably we won't all agree with all the criticism that were actually quite present and very present in Václav Havel's writings. I see also that our co-sponsor Jeff Goldfarb is very interested in like the discussion and would like to continue this discussion. So I very much hope that we will be able to do that. I don't know, would you like Jeff to say the last word before we end?
Well, I don't have any kind of brilliant last words, but I really want to thank everyone. As I wrote in a note in the chat function to the participants, they have given me reasons to hope, if not to be optimistic. I think that there were some really important issues about highlighting how the Czech opposition succeeded, but also they gave me reasons to be concerned. I worry about the participation of younger people, or the absence of participation, the absence of stakes, and they're concerned particularly about the environment and the ecology. And I note more than I did. I note now more than I did before the discussion about the need for the oppositions, democratic oppositions, not only in the Czech Republic, but in the region, and not only in the region, but in the world, the need to address the problem of social injustice and the need for a left, the need for a left that speaks the language of ordinary folks. So indeed, I hope that the Democracy Seminar and the Review of Democracy and the CEU together explore this all in the future, in future collaborative activities. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers. It was really a pleasure. The only conclusion that not the only, but one of the conclusions, one of the many conclusions I got from this conversation is that we still don't call Czech Republic Czechia. It's still Czech Republic in English. But yes, let's continue the discussion about Czech Republic of Czechia in our next debates. Thank you so much. It was truly fascinating, and I very much hope that we will continue the discussion about the problems that we discussed today in the future. Thank you once again. Thank you to all the speakers. It was really fascinating.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Great to
Thank
see you.
you.
Bye-bye.